Conducting an election is not cheap. It is understandable that the monies are from the state resources. We will talk about that now on the program. Running an election campaign is also not cheap. Campaign funding is a topic for another day. A trend disturbing Nigeria's democracy is money politics. That is what we will be talking about on the program, the money bags. Joining me here in the studio and joining us later also will be Mr. Clement Nwanko. But here is Mr. Olariwaju Suraj, a rights activist. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Always my pleasure.
What's your reaction to President Buhari's comment on the fact that the opposition is sitting on a lot of resources and perhaps they may be using it against him?
I think it's such a weighty statement, but it's also coming belatedly from the president. I mean, those really are part of the expectation from the civil society and concerned Nigerians that some of these monies should have been mopped back from the individual back into the system, and also efforts geared towards reinvigorating the anti-corruption agencies to actually achieve that main purpose of reducing the level of money that is into elections and also the compromising of the electoral processes. You know what happened with 2015, and you could see how monies were recovered from NIA, money were given to SSS, money were given to the police and all the agencies of government, including INEC officials. And that is also going to repeat itself, where there's a failure on the part of the sitting government to ensure that those who are affected are not only made to refund those money, those who collected, those who paid the money to them, and also prosecuted as a deterrent to the others.
So, Mr. Suraj, for a lot of Nigerians, because I know your group, the Coalition for Civil Society Against Anti-Corruption, has done a lot of work with some foreign organization to look at how bad things are in terms of corruption in the country, especially the issues of graft. How bad is the state of things in Nigeria? The monies that we cannot trace or see.
It was terribly bad. It's also a shame. I had reasons to discuss with some of our foreign partners, and I was left in my room and I was weeping, to myself, seeing the level of disgrace that we faced as a nation, as a people, and the level of bastardization of our sensibilities by some of those that we put in office. A single example is the Malabo case. The Malabo case was such a sad reality that almost all those you would hold in high esteem in Nigeria were almost connected. From the rank of the Attorney General to ministers, the president is yet to be proved, of the last regime, were highly connected. Officials of oil companies, IOC in Nigeria, were collecting money, cash, millions of dollars, moving them out of this country. $801 million entered Nigeria under that deal, and within a twinkle of 2 weeks, that money fizzled out in the system.
They were shared.
They were shared, terribly shared. EFCC did a brilliant job and was able to connect all those individuals that were collecting and how they were collected and shared. And that was why you have people being prosecuted currently in Italy.
Some of those monies might be used for elections, isn't it?
They were used. They were actually used for election. There was also some deal that were perfected by the Minister of Petroleum Resources, where they also, some of the characters under the SA, Strategic Alliance Agreement, were also getting some oil blocks, even from the multinational corporation. So it was a terrible situation that actually gave so much free money to the electoral process.
Let's bring Mr. Clement Nwanko to the program now. He joins us from our Abuja studio. He's a convener of the Election Situation Room. Many thanks, Mr. Nwanko, for your time on the program. If you look at the kind of revelation, if I may use that word, that the president gave last week about the level of corruption and perhaps his fears about the opposition sitting on resources, what's your reaction to this and perhaps the effect on election in Nigeria?
Well, the law is very clear on spending limits. when you look at the amounts already indicated in the Electoral Act and what is being proposed in the amendments that you have today, the limits are quite clear. $1 billion for the presidency. This is going up in recent amendments that have been proposed to $5 billion, 5 billion naira. So the law is quite clear. The challenge, of course, is that the law exists, but enforcement is very, very weak. It is one thing to talk about the amounts being spent on elections, and I think it's a major concern. But I think that we need to look beyond that. In 2015 elections, the ruling party at the time spent far much more money than all of the other parties put together. In fact, reports indicate official spending by the ruling party then was close to 9 billion naira, and that of the opposition was put at much lower than that. So I think when you look at the figures, it's not so much really a question of how much any of the parties have, because the correspondent, when you look at what was spent and the results from the election, the key thing is, of course, the Electoral Commission being very, very truthful and being very able to deliver on credible elections. In spite of how much the ruling party spent at the time, it couldn't deliver a result favorable to itself, and it was shoved out of power. I think it's a major concern. The president has raised a very major concern. I'm not quite sure whether this concern should be limited to the opposition. I think it's a question always, how do you curb monies being spent from government coffers, either at the state level or at the national level? And I think that what the president and indeed our political leaders need to put in place is a structure to track campaign expenditure, both by the ruling party and by the opposition party. There is no evidence that it's just one party that is spending so much money outside of permissible limits. So I think the law needs to be put in place. There has been conversations about an Electoral Offences Commission that needs to have been put in place. That Electoral Offences Commission bill is before the National Assembly. I think it's an important bill that the president should push in order to ensure that a commission exists that is able to officially monitor election campaign expenses, both by a ruling party and the opposition, in order to ensure that things are done in accordance with the law.